Minimalism has always walked a fine line between serene simplicity and stark emptiness. It began as an avant-garde ideal, a pursuit of pure form and clarity, and later blossomed into a mainstream lifestyle promise of calm amid consumer chaos. Yet what started as a genuine search for meaning through less eventually spiraled into another consumer product itself. In today's video, we'll journey through the rise and fall of minimalism, from its roots in early 20th century design and Zen philosophy, through its 2010s heyday as a trendy lifestyle, to its critique as a privileged fantasy and eventual downfall. We'll explore how minimalism's original ideals became distorted. Let's step into the empty room and begin. Minimalism's origin story weaves together Eastern philosophy and Western modernism. On one side, we have the influence of Zen Buddhism and traditional Japanese design. For centuries, Zen teachings have prized emptiness and space as vehicles for insight. Think of a Zen rock garden, a handful of stones on raked gravel, carefully placed to evoke entire mountains and rivers in the mind of the beholder. The famed dry garden at Ryoanji Temple in Kyoto, for example, uses just 15 rocks and white sand to represent a whole universe, inviting contemplative meditation in its abstract simplicity. The aesthetic of wabi-sabi, finding beauty in austere simplicity, is deeply ingrained in Japanese culture. In fact, when later modern architects in Japan embraced minimalist buildings in the 1980s, they weren't importing a new idea at all. They were tapping into long-standing Zen-influenced traditions. The Zen concept of ma, the negative space or interval, teaches that what is not can be as significant as what is. Early minimalist spaces drew on the spiritual notion that an empty room or a bare wall wasn't lifeless, it was alive with potential and clarity. Meanwhile, in the West, a parallel movement was underway: modernist design and the Bauhaus. In the 1920s, the German Bauhaus school, led by figures like Walter Gropius, championed the mantra "form follows function" and rejected extraneous ornament. Industrializing societies were ready to cast off the flowery excess of Victorian decor in favor of clean lines and honest materials. Bauhaus architecture and furniture stripped designs down to their essentials, aiming for an almost geometric purity. White walls, steel frames, unadorned facades, the look was born. By the mid-20th century, famed architects like Ludwig Mies van der Rohe adopted the motto "less is more" to describe this aesthetic. In practice, Mies's approach was to include only the necessary elements of a building, but arrange them with such care that the result felt impeccably complete. Every element had to serve multiple purposes. A wall might conceal structure and also act as a visual plane of colour. A floor might contain heating ducts that also provided seamless continuity. Around the same time, the designer Dieter Rams coined the phrase "less but better," reflecting a similar ethos that good design means removing the non-essential until only perfection remains. These pioneers were deeply serious about simplicity. For them, minimalism wasn't just a style, it was almost a moral principle, a better way to build a society after the upheavals of World War I and the rise of industrial clutter. I find it fascinating that East and West converged on this idea from different directions. The Bauhaus architects admired the simplicity of East Asian art and design, while Japanese modernists found validation in Western minimalism. By the mid-20th century, a trans-Pacific dialogue was underway. As one writer notes, by the 1980s, Japanese cities had become so chaotic with crowds, neon ads, and noise that minimalist architecture was seen as an antidote to this sort of urban overload. But this wasn't merely copying Western trends. It resonated with Japan's own Zen-rooted appreciation for calm and order amid chaos. Observers pointed out that Japan's embrace of minimalist design was a natural extension of its spirituality and view of nature. So in these early roots, minimalism carried a sort of lofty promise that you would reach tranquility through reduction. Whether in a Zen temple or a Bauhaus school, empty space was not something to fear, it was something to cherish. By the mid-50s and 60s, minimalism leapt from architecture into the art world and beyond. In New York, artists like Donald Judd, Dan Flavin, and Agnes Martin took the principles of less is more to the canvas and the gallery. They were reacting against the frenzy of abstract expressionism, so things like Jackson Pollock. Instead of emotional splatters, the minimalists presented cool, impersonal forms. Simple geometric shapes, solid colours, often industrial materials. A Judd sculpture might be just a series of identical steel boxes in a row, a Flavin installation, just fluorescent light tubes arranged in a corner. To many viewers, the new art felt shockingly sparse, even quite alienating. But the artists argued that by removing narrative and personal flourishes, the raw object could just speak for itself. A shape is a shape, they insisted, not a symbol for something else. This narrative might have resonated with some of the people who struggle with the nuance or the elitism sometimes found in the art world. One minimalist artist famously said, "A shape, a volume, a colour, a surface is something itself. It shouldn't be concealed as part of a different whole." The idea was to make art pure and self-referential, free of metaphor. That might feel like quite a heavy contrast from what we generally think of as art. This minimalist art movement drew directly from the early modernist inspirations we discussed. They expanded on the radical abstraction pioneered by groups like Distorting, with artists like Pierre Mondrian reducing paintings to grids of primary colours, and inspired by the reduction of forms in Bauhaus and Russian constructivism. The lineage is clear. Kazimir Malevich, painting a white square on a white background in 1918, was a spiritual predecessor to minimalist art, an expression of the absolute zero of painting. By the 1960s, minimalism became a full-fledged movement in art galleries. Critics alternatively lauded it as a cleansing simplicity or lambasted it as a cold rejection of humanity. The minimalist artists often used factory processes and simple repetition, giving their work a detached, almost mass-produced aura. Frank Stella, a painter associated with minimalism, famously stated, "What you see is what you see," emphasizing that viewers shouldn't hunt for hidden meanings or emotions in the work. In architecture and design, mid-century minimalism also reached new heights. Mies van der Rohe's steel and glass skyscrapers set the template for modern city skylines. Sleek towers like the Seagram Building in New York or the former IBM Plaza in Chicago, which exemplified an elegant austerity. Buildings became grids of glass, decoration was stripped away to reveal structure. Likewise, interior design in the mid to late 20th century took a minimalist turn among certain circles. Built-in furniture, open floor plans, neutral colour palettes. The international style in architecture was essentially minimalist. White concrete and glass slabs, right angles, open space. Even in consumer products, the ethos appeared. Braun appliances designed by Dieter Rams in the 1960s were ultra-simple, influencing later designers, including notably Apple in the 2000s. So by the late 20th century, minimalism had migrated from a niche art idea to a broader design language. It signified sophistication, modernity, and often a kind of intellectual rigor. Yet, it's important to note a quiet irony. While minimalism in design claimed to be for everyone, a sort of functional universal language, in practice it was often an elite taste. Most people weren't putting Donald Judd sculptures in their living rooms or living in mise-designed homes. Minimalism was, at first, a high culture phenomenon. Museums, avant-garde architecture, boutique modern furniture. The average home in the 1960s or 70s was still full of the usual busy patterns and knickknacks of its era. But seeds were being planted for minimalism to trickle down. If you opened an architecture magazine in the 1970s, you might see a stark white bedroom with a platform bed and one abstract painting, a look that would later become the aspirational ideal for millions of Pinterest boards decades later. Minimalism also had a spiritual dimension still percolating under the surface. Remember how Zen influenced the philosophy? Some architects explicitly talked about space and light as almost sacred elements. For example, minimalists believed that in architecture, designing with an emphasis on natural light, clean space, and simple materials could evoke a sense of sort of calm reverence. They spoke of essence. One description of minimalist architecture explains that all parts and details are reduced to a point where nothing further can be removed to improve the design. The goal was to reveal the essence of form and even to engage a spiritual silence. The idea that a truly minimalist space allows the occupant's mind to come to rest. There shouldn't be anything to distract you, anything that seems out of place. Such lofty ideals gave minimalism a halo of profundity. It wasn't just about a look, it was about achieving an almost monastic purity in a world of noise. Minimalism might have started in art and high design, but over time it began to filter into everyday life philosophies. By the late 20th century, ideas about voluntary simplicity and decluttering were bubbling up. In the 1980s and 90s, a number of writers and movements encouraged people to question consumer clutter and live with less. Books about simple living became modestly popular. Think of them as precursors to the minimalism lifestyle trend. They urged readers to downsize possessions, focus on experiences over things, and find happiness in less consumption. For instance, the Zen influence found its way into pop culture through martial arts, meditation, and New Age thinking. For instance, the Zen influence found its way into pop culture through things like meditation, New Age thinking, and even martial arts, often carrying the message that material attachments impede spiritual growth. Western interest in practices like yoga and feng shui, which often emphasize uncluttered space for good energy, paved the way for minimalism to be seen not just as an art style, but as a self-help or lifestyle choice. We also can't overlook economic and technological factors. The late 2000s brought the 2008 financial crisis, which brutally underscored the excess and instability of debt-fueled consumerism. In its wake, some people swung the opposite direction, embracing frugality and minimalism out of necessity or philosophy. There was a renewed interest in paring down, living in smaller homes, or even joining the emerging tiny house movement to avoid mortgages. At the same time, technology was digitizing many possessions. Your CD and DVD collections, your paperwork, even books could now vanish into the slim form of a laptop, an iPhone, a Kindle. Suddenly one could conceivably live out of a single backpack. and still have access to thousands of songs, movies, and books via gadgets. The conditions were right for minimalism to move from aesthetic to a pragmatic lifestyle. By the early 2010s, these currents came together and minimalism as a lifestyle trend truly exploded into the mainstream. This was the era when being a minimalist became an identity people were proud to claim on blogs and social media. Unlike the somber tone of 1960s minimal art, the new minimalism was sunny and aspirational. Promised freedom from the tyranny of too much stuff. Best-selling books and viral blogs touted the liberating effects of decluttering your home and life. People started throwing around phrases like spark joy and capsule wardrobe in everyday conversation. The lifestyle was often visualized as an airy apartment with white walls, a single succulent plant on a spotless table, and a closet holding a dozen carefully chosen garments in neutral tones. It was essentially Instagram-bait, highly curatable and photogenic. Influencers on YouTube gave tours of their scantily furnished living spaces, claiming greater happiness and focus thanks to owning almost nothing. Of course, that greater happiness would have nothing to do with making money just by showing off their homes online. Minimalism had gone pop culture. We can't really discuss the mainstream boom of minimalism without mentioning Marie Kondo. The soft-spoken Japanese queen of decluttering became a global phenomenon around the mid-2010s. Her book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, which was first published in Japanese in 2011 and then in English in 2014, sold millions of copies and introduced the world to the idea that tidying could be a path to personal transformation. Kondo's KonMari method had a simple, almost spiritual test for whether to keep an object. Hold it in your hands and ask, does it spark joy? If not, thank it and let it go. The gentle anthropomorphism of our socks and books charmed audiences, and soon people everywhere were purging their closets and folding their t-shirts into neat little rectangles. Kondo made decluttering feel good, even ceremonial. By the time her Netflix series aired in 2019, minimalism had hit reality TV, entering living rooms and messy cupboards around the world. Kondo was part of a larger wave. In the US, a duo known simply as the Minimalists, Joshua Fields Milburn and Ryan Nicodemus, garnered attention with their blog, books, and 2016 Netflix documentary. They were two young professionals who had ditched six-figure corporate careers and lots of stuff in favor of a simpler life. Their message boiled down to owning less equals more freedom. Around the same time, countless bloggers and YouTubers took up the mantle, offering tips on how to pare down your possessions to the essentials. Challenges like Project 333, wearing only 33 items of clothing for 3 months, or the 100 Things Challenge, whittle your possessions down to 100 things, became trendy. The minimalist lifestyle promised not only a tidier home, but reduced stress, more savings, and even a clearer mind. Advocates claimed that by decluttering personal stuff, you could also declutter your mental space, a concept that does have some psychological backing. Visual clutter can overwhelm after all. I'm sure that many people can relate to that, particularly those who experience things like overstimulation. In this period, minimalism intertwined with wellness culture. It was positioned as part of living your best life, often alongside things like yoga, meditation, healthy eating. One Guardian writer even slyly observed that minimalism as a secular kind of religion had become an add-on in the culture of general self-improvement, mixing a bit of spirituality, a bit of aesthetics, a bit of moral undertone. You can definitely see that minimalism was taking more of a moral flavour in popular discourse. Choosing to live with less was often portrayed as virtuous, a stand against waste and consumerism, an environmental stance. This was the era of people humble bragging about how few items they owned or how they fit their life in a backpack. On platforms like Medium, countless personal essays celebrated the revelation that getting rid of stuff brought peace of mind. It was almost evangelical. Converts preaching the gospel of less, urging others to free themselves from material bonds. But beneath the glossy blog posts and sun-dappled Instagram photos of half-empty rooms, not all was as it seemed. Many began to notice a certain homogeneity in the minimalist lifestyle imagery. The same white-on-white aesthetic, the same echo of loft-style chic. As Chelsea Fagan pointed out, it became your white-on-white-on-white life, a meticulously crafted wardrobe of only the most wispy products, a saltine cracker's idea of what a cool girl would wear. In other words, minimalist style got very trendy and specific. Neutral tones, clean lines, maybe a touch of Scandinavian or Japanese decor. It was supposed to be individual freedom, yet started to look like uniform. There's no reason under the ideals that minimalism was originally founded on that your home can't include bright colours or busy patterns if those are the things that you enjoy. Some critics also noticed that much of this was targeted to and embraced by a fairly narrow demographic, often young, urban, and with a decent disposable income to spend on a few nice things instead of many cheap things. We'll dig into that critique in a moment, but first let's talk about how the commercial world caught on to minimalism and how the movement ironically started selling itself. Here's where our story takes a bit of a twist. Minimalism, a movement ostensibly about not buying stuff, became a goldmine of selling stuff. As its popularity soared, businesses large and small started cashing in on the minimalist craze. Retailers produced lines of minimalism-inspired products, from sleek logo-free clothing to simple home furnishings, all marketed with the promise that these were the last ones you'd ever need. A bizarre contradiction emerged. You can now spend a lot of money in order to live with less. Perhaps the most glaring example of commercialism is the trajectory of Marie Kondo herself. After years of urging people to shed excess belongings, Kondo launched an online store in late 2019, offering an array of home goods and trinkets. This news was met with equal parts amusement and consternation. Headlines effectively read, "Marie Kondo says get rid of stuff, then buy my stuff." As one report dryly noted, Kondo's approach seemed to be rid your home of things that don't spark joy, then replace them with items from her new online store. The store featured approximately 150 items, including a $200 tea container, $96 ladle, a pair of $206 leather room shoes, and a $275 brass kitchen utensil holder. Perhaps the most head-scratching offering was a therapeutic tuning fork and crystal set. Essentially a metal fork you strike against a rose quartz rock to supposedly realign your home's vibrations. A Guardian columnist lampooned it as the world's most unnecessary item, quipping that it was the least necessary object ever created, especially coming from the queen of decluttering. It's literally a tuning fork you bang on a rock. Hitting this tuning fork on the rock feels almost like banging a gong to announce your own gullibility. The sense of betrayal amongst some minimalist enthusiasts was palpable. Here was a woman who built an empire on teaching us to live in an empty house, now seemingly encouraging us to fill it up again. One observer joked it was as if a famous fitness guru had followed up a weight loss book by opening a donut shop. Kondo defended herself by suggesting that once you declutter, you make room for meaningful objects, and her shop was simply offering quality items for that purpose. Still, the irony was rich. Minimalism had become a marketing gimmick. Now, I don't want to jump on Marie Kondo too much here. She's not alone. Numerous entrepreneurs and influencers jumped on the bandwagon. Professional organizer services offering for a hefty fee to help you purge and perfectly arrange your home. Stores like Container Store had a heyday selling storage bins, minimalist shelving, closet systems, so people could better display their reduced possessions. A whole publishing subgenre emerged with journals, planners, workbooks for tracking your minimalist journey. A bit self-defeatingly, these are of course additional items to buy. Fashion brands rolled out capsule wardrobe collections, urging you to buy their simple, versatile pieces, often for a hefty price tag, and toss out your other clothes. As one critic noted, minimalism as style became just another flavour of conspicuous consumerism. A way of saying to the world, look at me. Look at all the things I have refused to buy and the incredibly expensive, sparse items I have deemed worthy instead. The very act of not buying was turned into a spectacle of having, or as Fagin put it, a way to ape the connotations of simplicity, without actually having to give up those sweet, sweet class signifiers. To illustrate the absurdity, consider the phenomenon of minimalist luxury. One could purchase, for example, a plain white t-shirt for $80 because it was made of slightly better cotton and promised to last, replacing a dozen cheaper shirts. The logic, buy fewer but buy better. It sounds sensible, even virtuous. Quality over quantity, less waste, but in practice it meant those with upfront disposable income could play this game. Not everyone can drop $1,000 in one go to build a chic 10-piece wardrobe of silk, cashmere and linen in tasteful beige. Yet that's what a lot of minimalist lifestyle gurus implicitly or even explicitly recommended. Buy less, buy better. Essentially became code for being able to afford to choose, as one essayist put it. It echoes the rhetoric you get with these money-saving cookbooks and TV programs where they encourage you to buy huge joints of meat. If you need food now and don't currently have the money to buy that, what are you going to eat in the time it takes you to save for it? This mindset that you can invest if you don't have the money in the first place is a logical fallacy. Three pairs of high-end merino wool socks will indeed outlast or outperform a bulk pack of cheap socks, but they'll also cost triple, a fact that is often glossed over in minimalist sermons. Minimalist interiors too became a service you could buy. Interior designers would gladly charge you a premium to create that perfectly sparse look. High-end furniture brands like Muji, which ironically is all about no-brand minimalism, sold simplicity at not-so-simple prices. Even tech companies latched on. You'll notice how Apple's marketing around this time emphasized the minimalist design of iPhones and MacBooks, the sleek, featureless surfaces. Simplicity is luxury. Minimalism's aesthetic had become fully commodified. At this point, we've seen minimalism rise to global fame and then start to eat its own tail commercially. It's time to turn to the mounting critiques that arose, questioned who minimalism was really for and what it really achieved. The backlash to trendy minimalism began as a murmur and grew louder by the late 2010s. A central critique, minimalism is a luxury that only the privileged can afford. On the surface, that might sound paradoxical. Why would you need to be privileged to have less? But writers and commentators unpacked this brilliantly. Essentially, to choose minimalism, you first have to have a safety net or a surplus. As one commentator put it, the only people who can practice minimalism in any meaningful way are people upon whom it isn't forced by financial or logistical circumstances. If you're living in poverty, you might already own very little, but that's not a trendy lifestyle choice, it's a hard reality. You don't get applauded for your simple life, you're struggling to get by. One particularly scathing Guardian article noted the uncomfortable truth that minimalist lifestyle blogs rarely addressed. You cannot choose to declutter if you are already living in a sparse home you cannot afford to furnish. You can't reduce the food you consume if you're already only able to put one good meal on the table per day. For a single parent barely scraping rent together, the advice to cut back and live with less is tone deaf at best and offensive at worst. Nearly half of Americans, for example, couldn't cover an unexpected $400 expense and they just live paycheck to paycheck. That's the reality. To tell such a person that they should try owning even less for their spiritual benefit is absurd. The writer went on to call performative reduction one of the most gratuitous displays of privilege out there, when framed as moral virtue. Similarly, in a Medium essay aptly titled "Minimalism is Privilege," author Jen Sutherland recounts a conversation where a friend pointed out that having the concept of minimalism as a choice is itself a sign of having plenty. She gives a pointed example. An evangelist of minimalism might say, "I only have 3 pairs of shoes as a badge of honor." But many people in the world have only 1 pair of shoes because they cannot afford more. It's not a Pinterest challenge, it's life. Sutherland speaks of travelers bragging about packing light, buying it there, or renting on site. Behaviors that actually require extra money to pull off, and often shift burdens elsewhere. Her take is that minimalist choices, without acknowledging one's privilege, can deepen divides and be environmentally or socially reckless. For instance, discarding items that end up as someone else's problem. Another aspect of privilege in minimalism is the notion of starting over. Some minimalists advocated radical steps like packing up all your possessions, then only taking things out as you need them. This new literature of minimalism, as one New Yorker piece noted, is full of stressful advice of that sort, essentially simulating poverty or remove to see what you really require. But if you genuinely have few possessions and no ability to replace things, you can't play that game. The safety net of knowing you can always go buy a replacement if needed is what makes voluntary deprivation empowering rather than terrifying. It's a kind of poverty tourism, and some have cynically called it well-off individuals dabbling in less to feel pure, knowing all along they have a credit card and stock pantry in the background. Critics also highlighted a subtle classist and even racial dynamic in how minimalism is portrayed. The aesthetic of minimalism, the airy all-white apartment, the Scandinavian wood furniture, the luxury of empty space, tends to be reflective of a specific culture. It was frequently young white influencers and tech bros flaunting their sparse setups. As one article rightly noted, as with so many other social phenomena that insufferable white dudes have co-opted, this spiritual minimalism has essentially become yet another competition for who can be the best at having less shit. In other words, once the trend got popular, a certain bro-ish one-upmanship emerged. Who can own even less? Who can be more aesthetic, more zen, more pure? The voices of this movement often didn't reflect those of lower income communities or people of colour. In fact, some observers felt minimalism's preachy tone carried an implication of, if you only simplify, anyone can have this beautiful life, sidestepping systemic issues of inequality. Meanwhile, the aesthetic's dominance by white Western images belied minimalism's non-Western roots, ironic given its Zen inspiration. There was even a tendency to exoticize minimalism's simplicity as Japanese style without acknowledging the real Japan. One critic mocked the trend's cherry-picking of Japanese elements, the vaguely Japanese home decor, because we assume literally anything that isn't crowded with colour and pattern is somehow automatically Japanese. It's a tongue-in-cheek reminder that the minimalist look sometimes appropriated Zen and Japanese design superficially, slapping a bonsai or shoji screen on a room to signal enlightenment, while the deeper cultural context is completely lost. In summary, by the late 2010s, it was increasingly pointed out that minimalism's poster children were often financially secure, often white, and certainly comfortable enough to choose a Spartan life. The movement risked appearing oblivious to the realities of those who live with less not by choice but by lack of choice. Minimalism, once billed as egalitarian, anyone can tidy up, was revealed to have barriers to entry. Not everyone has the time, space, or money to curate their possessions in this way. As Fagan sharply put it, minimalism lets you get all the gold coins of poverty without ever having to be one of those icky poor people. The aesthetic nod to monk-like living was, for some, a fashion statement rather than a lived hardship. Beyond class and race, another critique of minimalism emerged from plain practicality. Life, in all its messiness, doesn't always cooperate with a minimalist ideal. A minimalist lifestyle might be relatively attainable for a single person or a couple with no kids, living in a small apartment, but with a stable routine. But introduce a few children, or a disability, or any unpredictable life circumstances, and strict minimalism can become a stressful tightrope to walk. A humorous and telling example came from Marie Kondo's own life. In early 2023, after years of being celebrated and occasionally teased as the ultimate neat freak, Marie Kondo admitted something that made global headlines. With 3 young children, she had kind of given up on keeping a perfectly tidy home. The woman whose name had become synonymous with immaculate organisation was now saying that actually, spending time with her kids was more important than folding laundry just so. My home's messy, she confessed, but the way I'm spending my time is the right way for me at this stage of my life. This confession was met with relief and schadenfreude in equal measure from parents everywhere. "Welcome to the club, Marie," many joked. Her revelation underscored a simple truth. Children are the natural enemy of minimalism. Kids accumulate toys, make constant messes, outgrow clothes and gear at a rapid clip. The labour required to constantly declutter and curate with little ones underfoot can be exhausting and frankly not worth it compared to the joys and chaos of family life. Kondo's shift was a moment of levity that even the Queen of Clean could let a little disorder into her life when priorities changed. Similarly, consider people who have hobbies or professions that require equipment or materials. I'm definitely one of these people myself. An artist might want a clean studio, but the very fact that art creation involves a lot of tools and supplies make that difficult. A chef's kitchen is rarely minimal when in use. Pots, pans, ingredients abound. For many, a totally sparse environment would actually hinder their daily activities. There's also a matter of sentimental items. Minimalism often counselled being ruthless about old photos, souvenirs, inherited knickknacks. Don't keep it if it's not useful or joyful. But to some, that felt like an emotionally flattening life. Not everything important in life sparks joy in the Kondo sense. Some things we keep out of duty, memory, or because we might need them in an emergency. Accessibility needs can conflict with minimalism. Someone with a disability might need lots of medical equipment, or simply find that having backups and redundancies of certain items like medication, assistive devices, etc. is crucial for peace of mind. They also might find it difficult to have everything neatly put away at all times rather than readily accessible. The minimalist mantra of own one of each thing and no more doesn't apply well in such cases. Even the layout of a minimalist home with hard edges, minimalist furniture, can be less comfortable for those who need cushioned seating, varied textures for sensory needs, or just more stuff to facilitate daily living. There's also the mental health angle. For some people, the pressure to maintain a sparse environment can itself cause anxiety, a kind of reverse clutter anxiety. They may feel guilty for every purchase or fearful of any mess, turning minimalism into an obsessive routine. The New Yorker essay The Pitfalls and the Potential of the New Minimalism alluded to the stressful advice prevalent in minimalist literature. The regimen of constantly editing of one's possessions can become a joyless taskmaster. When minimalism is treated as dogma, a few toys on the floor or an uncurated shelf can induce a disproportionate amount of stress. It's an inadvertent trap. You got into minimalism to feel calm, but now you're neurotically policing the quantity of your socks. In light of these realities, many have found a more moderate path. Some call it minimal-ish, adopting the principles and mindful consumption and tidy spaces, but not beating oneself up if the kids scatter Lego everywhere on a Saturday afternoon, or if a beloved collection of books defies the one shelf rule. The key is that minimalism, to work long term, has to be flexible around the contours of real life. A rigid application can lead to burnout or to giving up entirely, as Kondo seemingly did when family life took over. Looking back at this journey, you can't help but feel that minimalism as a trend drifted far from its original ideals. What began as an authentic search for clarity, spiritual, artistic, environmental, became, at the height of its popularity, something rather shallow and performative. The concept of minimalism was co-opted by marketing, wrapped by social media, and burdened with moralizing that its early pioneers likely never intended. Originally, the beauty of minimalism was the simplicity. Simplicity in form, simplicity in life, leading, hopefully, to clarity of mind. But as minimalism became more of a buzzword, its premise grew vague and kept shifting. Was it about aesthetics or ethics? Was a minimalist life superior or just different? The movement started accommodating whatever each person wanted to project. Many practitioners quietly held an air of superiority, as if living with fewer belongings made one inherently wiser or more virtuous. Minimalism, in some circles, slid into a kind of virtue signaling. Online forums were rife with humble bragging. I got rid of another 20 books today, feeling so free. And as critics noted, it often implied a weirdly tone-deaf imitation of poverty, sleeping on a mattress on the floor as an enlightened choice, while someone who has no furniture isn't invited to the TED Talk. The spiritual rhetoric around minimalism also got diluted. The Zen-like focus on emptiness as illuminating was replaced by Instagram-friendly platitudes. Some minimalists adopted quasi-spiritual language, speaking of like energy and mindfulness, but it often came off as self-serious posturing. It's telling that a lot of the profound wisdom gleaned from extreme minimal experiments became fodder for Medium articles and self-help books. It's not that these insights were fake per se. Many people truly did feel better after decluttering, but the way it was packaged and sold felt cynical to a lot of observers. As Fagan joked, it usually makes for excellent self-serious Medium content down the road. Minimalism turned into an internet spectacle at times. People on YouTube filming themselves living out of a single suitcase, or influencers writing pieces hailing having no furniture. The fact that it was documented and shared so performatively was itself a contradiction of the supposed minimalist ethos of focusing on the internal rather than the external. In design and consumer culture, minimalism's distortion is perhaps most visually evident. The minimalist home ideal, all surface, no substance became a cliche, an empty stage set that signified modern successful person lives here. The original Bauhaus minimalists sought honesty and function, but the 2010s minimalist condo often had impractical all-white couches, you better not sit on it, and artfully placed objects for show. The soul of minimalism was drained in favour of the look. It reached a point where someone could have a pristine minimalist living room yet feel utterly chaotic in life, because they've shoved all the mess behind cupboard doors or metaphorically failed to address the deeper issues. Minimalism wasn't automatically delivering peace or insight as promised. You could feel just as lost in a Spartan loft as in a hoarder's den if the underlying mindset wasn't there. By the end of the 2010s, popular sentiment had shifted. Many were growing weary of the holier-than-thou tone and the monochrome aesthetics. As we noted, even key figures like Kondo eased their stance. The world seemed ready for something new, perhaps a swing of the pendulum. Indeed, enter the rise of maximalism and cluttercore. In the early 2020s, a counter-trend emerged among younger generations, especially Gen Z, embracing bold, busy, and personal spaces. Platforms like TikTok and design sites showcased rooms overflowing with colour, pattern, and beloved objects. The idea was to reclaim coziness and personality, rejecting the impersonal showroom feel of minimalist design. One magazine described cluttercore as Gen Z's direct confrontation with minimalism. Chaotic, messy, and overwhelming by design, a celebration of having stuff that tells a story. While minimalism said pare down to your most you objects, cluttercore said, actually, all these little items are me, and I want to see them all. It was a rebellious, even whimsical aesthetic movement, essentially swinging the style dial from less is more to more is more. Even mainstream interior trends acknowledged a resurgence of maximalist interiors by the 2020s, with layered decor and eclectic collections on display. It seems the culture had, to some extent, gotten its fill of minimalist restraint. So, after exploring the world of minimalism, where do we stand on it? Like many movements, minimalism had its cycle of idealism, popularity, and backlash. Its rise gave us some genuine gifts. We became more conscious of our consumption. Many discovered the relief of decluttering a packed cupboard. And design indeed got cleaner and arguably more user-friendly. Few would wish to return to the overstuffed Victorian homes or the clunky 90s gadget designs. The language of minimalism, sparking joy, less is more, entered common parlance and made us think twice before accumulating things. Even as a temporary trend, it helped some people reset their relationship with stuff in a healthy way. However, its fall teaches equally important lessons. First, that any good idea can be hollowed out when commercialized or moralized to an extreme. Minimalism was never supposed to be a competition or a status symbol, yet in the glare of social media, it became one. Second, it highlights the need for inclusivity and realism in lifestyle movements. A philosophy that doesn't account for different socio-economic realities will inevitably appear naive or elitist. Minimalism needed a dose of empathy, and some practitioners and writers did try to emphasize flexible personal approaches, but those voices were sometimes drowned out by more dogmatic ones. In a slightly darker sense, the arc of minimalism also underscores a human truth. We often swing between extremes, searching for meaning. In a world of excess, minimalism can feel like salvation, but taken too far, it becomes its own kind of void. The mysterious allure of an empty space can quickly turn into a confrontation with ourselves, and that's not always comfortable. Perhaps that's why the tone of this commentary has been a bit dark and mysterious in itself. Minimalism invites existential questions. When you strip away everything, what remains? Sometimes peace, sometimes anxiety, sometimes just the realization that you've gotten rid of something you actually needed later. There's an almost spooky quality to a life with hardly any objects, a sense that something might be missing or that you're trying to live as a ghost in your own home. We chuckle quietly at the absurdities like the $58 tuning fork or the guru of tidiness drowning in toddler toys because they reveal the humanness behind the immaculate facade. In the end, minimalism's legacy might be best seen as a pendulum swing on the larger continuum of how we relate to material things. Neither extreme hoarding nor austere minimalism is ideal. Most people find their comfort somewhere in the middle. The rise and fall of minimalism has at least made us aware of that spectrum. It encouraged a conversation about intentional living, even if the conversation got muddled. And it proved somewhat humorously that we can manage to turn even nothing into something to sell. Minimalism as a mass trend may have waned, but its core message, focus on what truly matters, is an enduring one. The trick is to remember that what matters isn't the same for everyone, and you can't purchase it in some fancy lifestyle store. Perhaps a new, more balanced chapter will follow, one that keeps the wisdom of less without the baggage. As we turn out the lights on the era of minimalism, we're left with one final image. A quiet, empty room at twilight, neither joyful nor sad in itself. It's up to each of us to decide what to bring into that room. After all the hype and disillusionment, maybe that simple space can once again be a canvas for thoughtful living, a place where less can be more, not as slogans or spectacles, but as a personal choice grounded in our own reality. And if a stray, joy-sparking object or two rolls into the room, so be it. Emptiness, like everything, is best in moderation.